Welcome, everyone. I am Ward 2 Alderman Will Stewart, and I'm here today with Bob Gagne, Chair of the City of Manchester Board of Assessors. And we're here today to talk briefly about this year's revaluation of all real estate here in Manchester and what it means for you and your taxes. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's jump right in. What exactly is property revaluation and why is it happening now?
Okay, so I guess I'll answer with the legal response first, and then we can talk about why it's really done. So in the state of New Hampshire, we're required to have values anew, and that's a term that comes right out of the Constitution, values anew at least every 5 years or more oftener. And again, that's a term right out of the Constitution. There are also state statutes that require that we update values every 5 years. So our cycle, which started in 2001, is every 5 years. In 2021 was our required cycle. So that's the legal reason we do it. But what would be the other reasons we might do a revaluation? And really the reason is to make sure that everybody's tax burden is fair. Property taxes, what they represent is everyone's share of the common burden. And in the state of New Hampshire, that's measured based on your property tax, based on your property value. Based on market value in the year of the revaluation. And to that value is applied a uniform tax rate that everybody pays. So it's not a fee for services. You're not paying to have your streets plowed and not for schools. Everybody pays the same rate. And the measure of what your burden is your market value. So in the year we do a revaluation, the target is 100% of market value. And in the years after that, between the current and then the next revaluation, of course, the market changes. Sometimes, most of the time it goes up, sometimes it comes down. After the 2006 revaluation, values came down. After the 2016, our most recent revaluation, values have been coming up. And as you get away from that year of the revaluation, different properties will change in value at different rates. And you'll get to the point where the percentage of value compared to market value is different for those properties. And then the further away you get from the reval, the worse that gets. And then you have people paying too much or too little of the common burden, which is why we do the revaluations at all. And the frequency is based on the statutes.
So it definitely sounds like you don't want to keep things fair for everybody is kind of the goal. So how exactly are property values determined? What factors kind of are taken into account and by whom?
Okay, so I get this question quite frequently, and if it's a group of people in a room, I ask, who of you have bought or sold real estate? And if your hand goes up, then I say, then you're who determines what the values are and what the assessments are. So we as assessors and the revaluation company as the contractor, they look at what the market participants are doing in the market, and then they use that to construct tables to set the values of the property. So really, it's based on market data. And just to back up a step, in a revaluation, there's a couple types of revaluations, and a full revaluation would involve two parts. It would involve data collection, and then it would involve an analysis of the sales and setting of the values. What we're doing this year is what's called a full statistical revaluation. And it does not include a measuring list. It does not include an inspection of every property. The last time we did a full measuring list was in 2006. And we've done a really good job of keeping our data fresh and current since then. We track building permits, we track multiple listing sales. We're doing what we can to keep the data fresh. So what we're doing this year is updating the values based on the sold properties. So that's called a full statistical update, and that's what we contracted for. I'm not sure if that entirely answered that part of the question, but.
Sure. Yeah. No. Thank you. So, I'm curious. You mentioned that most oftentimes values go up, and that's certainly the case right now. I don't think anyone is unaware of kind of the red hot nature of the market right now. So, how if at all, our current market conditions, how are they going to affect homeowners' assessments?
So every year we report our sales to the Department of Revenue because they're responsible for estimating what our gross value is. And the way they do that is they run some statistical analysis and they produce a whole host of statistics, but the couple that we really are concerned with is the general level of assessment, which is our median ratio. So you have average, median, and mean, and the one that works the best for measuring the uniformity of appraisals is the median ratio. And what they do is they'll take and compare the sold price with the assessment. They divide the assessment by the sale price, and for the last period that they did the statistics for the city of Manchester, we were at 73.4%. What that means is our assessments based on the sales for that year were 73.4% of market value. And in the sales period that they look at, in the state of New Hampshire, your value for tax purposes is April 1st. That's the inventory date by law. So our sales period is 6 months before and after that April 1st. So for the 2020 statistics, the sales are from October 1st of 19 to September 30th of 2020. And for that time period, we're at 73.4%. So that's kind of the starting point of determining what values are going to do. Now, if you just do a raw calculation of how much values would have to change for that 73.4% to come up to 100%, that would require an increase in overall values of about 36%. It's not 27%. You need to take one and divide it by 73.4%. And that will tell you that values are going to come up roughly 36%. I would tell you that after that sale period, meaning we've had sales from October 1st of 20 to today, those sales are telling us that the 73.4% has eroded even further, meaning that our ratio, if we were to measure it today, is even lower. So, when I talk about what's going to happen to people's values and what are the averages for singles, condos, multifamilies, industrial property, commercial property, it's all going to be based on that snapshot that was taken of the sales between October 1st of 19 and September 30th of 20. If there's been additional change since then, the revaluation company will capture that, but they're going to report on what that is. So overall, we expect values to increase somewhere between 35 and 40%, again, of the entire population of properties. Those statistics that I talked about are heavily driven by residential properties. Out of 1,582 sales in that total for that time period, 838 were single families, 387 were condominium, and 251 were 2 to 4 multifamily properties. It's important to know that, to understand that since single family drives the increase, they're likely to increase about the same amount as the overall. And that kind of holds true if I look at my statistics. So overall, we were at 73.4%. Single families are at 74.6%. So on average, single families are assessed a little bit above the general level, meaning that their values will come up on average about the same amount as the overall. Multifamily properties, 2 to 4 units, are at 70.6%, meaning their values have to come up more to get to that 100%. Apartments, 5 units and above, so that's from 5 units right up to 300, 400 units. They were at 68% for that 2020 time period. So their values have to come up even more than the 2 to 4s and single families to get to 100%. And residential condominiums were at 71.5%. So they're a little bit more under assessed than single families, but that's not a whole lot of difference. Commercial properties, commercial land and building, we don't have a lot of those sales. There are only 18, but they indicate that commercial properties are about 84%, meaning they're overassessed compared to the average. So their values will only have to come up roughly 17% to get to 100. So they're likely to see some property tax relief. It's also important to understand that it doesn't matter, the system is blind to whether it's a commercial, residential, industrial property, the mall in New Hampshire, whatever, it's blind to that. The test of your fair burden is market value and the tax rate. So it's kind of unpopular to see that the overall taxes might shift away from commercial to residential. But remember who to blame for that. It's the people that put the hand up that ever sold or bought a property, right? It's the market participants. So it's not that somebody has designs on shifting that burden in a particular direction. It's just the result of what the market is doing.
So you mentioned that roughly 30% number that you expect to those assessments or values to rise. Is that like a 1-to-1? Can we expect prices or taxes to go up by a third? How does that work?
No. So that's kind of a separate conversation. So I guess another important concept is you can't apply the current tax rate to the new values. So once we have our new values, the Department of Revenue and the city, I don't set the tax rate. The city doesn't set the tax rate. The aldermen don't set the tax rate. We report the various components that go into calculating the tax rate, and the Department of Revenue sets that. So in general terms, if our tax base goes up 36 or 37%, the tax rate should come down to offset that. Our estimates are, all other things being equal, the tax rate, rather than being $24.66, would be around $18 if we were at 100% of market value today, which is the goal come the final bill. So what happens to your tax burdens? Well, we already talked about those commercial properties. So they're likely to, that might be in the bucket of the third of properties that see a lower tax bill for the year. We talked about residential values going up about average. So if you look at the entirety of the residential single family, that burden is going to be about the same. And then, the third that are probably going to see an increase just in the strata, just in the various types of properties, are going to be the multifamilies and to a lesser degree, the condominium. I don't have a lot of statistics on industrial, but the little that I have indicates that they've about held their own. So I think that the industrial strata, they're not going to have the same benefit as the commercial as far as like relief on that. I think their values, industrial properties, warehouse distribution, that's a pretty hot segment right now. I think if we had more sales, they would hold up that ratio is about the same as the overall. So that's kind of an overall between the property types. But if we look at how is this going to impact within a property type, like with single families and condos, I can tell you, and people who read the paper on Fridays that have the transfers in there, right? They put in all of the real estate transfers in every Friday in that edition of the Union Leader. So people will look at that and see what's going on in their neighborhoods. I can tell you what I'm seeing is that the lower price ranges, meaning anything that's got a value under $250 for a single family home and maybe under $175 for a condominium, those are really the hottest properties right now. And the lower you get in prices, the hotter they are. And I'll give you an example. We have some condo conversions in the city, apartment properties that 10, 20 years ago were converted to individual condominium ownership. We've got quite a few of those where the average value in those projects is between high 40s and mid 50s, so 48, 55,000. Those units today are selling for in excess of 100,000. They're selling upwards of 115, 120,000. Well, to get from 50,000 in value or 55,000 in value to 125, that's not a 36% increase. That's more than doubling, right? So there's going to be some sticker shock there. And people will argue, well, it's not fair that mine went up so much. Well, it kind of means that for several years now, you haven't been paying your fair share. There's no provision other than doing a revaluation every year to phase in those increases, right? If we were doing revaluations every year, we would still see that those properties would more than double from 2016 to 2021, but we would have been picking it up a little bit each year. That's not the case. For various reasons, we don't, it's expensive to do a revaluation. We could do it every year. We could do it every couple of years. And maybe that's what's recommended in the future. But for the time being, we're on that 5-year schedule that's required by law. So what I'm seeing in the sales I'm looking at is, the lower price ranges are going to see that impact of, and this is singles, condos, even the 2 to 4 families. The lower price ranges are going to see a bigger increase than the high end price ranges. The $1 million properties in the city haven't doubled in value in the last 5 years. The $700,000 properties in the city haven't doubled in value. So their increase is not going to be as great. But again, it's not that anybody's got designs on shifting that burden on from one set of shoulders to another. It's the market participants and what the sales are doing that we're reporting on, and that's the result. So
you mentioned various timelines. So with regard to the reval this year, what is the timeline, and when can homeowners in particular expect to see? When are they going to find out what the new numbers are?
Sure. So the contract called for the revaluation company, Vision Government Solutions Inc., VGSI, to, of course, they're looking at sales and building permit properties. That was part of the contract. They need to look at sales because if you're gonna estimate the value of 33,000 parcels on the 2,000 sales that occur every year, you want to make sure that that sales data is accurate, right? If it's not, if you don't start with accurate data there, then when you apply those values to everything else, it's not going to be a good result. So they've already gone out and visited the roughly 2,000 sold properties in a time period they're looking at, which was April 1st to today. They've completed looking at the building permits that we assigned to them. We're doing some of those internally as well. They completed that work, including data entry, within the last week or two. And now they're starting to do the analysis on what those sales mean for our revaluation. That's being worked on today. The schedule is that they're going to have their preliminary values for the Board of Assessors, for me and my partner on the board, Mike Hurley. They're going to have some information for us within a couple or 3 weeks. We participate in that because once the revaluation company gives us the final product and goes away, it's our numbers for the next 5 years. So we're very involved with taking a look at what they're analyzing. We may know something they don't about a neighborhood or a market or a sale or a group of sales. We also are sensitive to, are they seeing things the way we see them? So we'll work with them once they give us preliminary values. They'll go back and fine tune their work. And then by the end of July, they should be ready to publish some preliminary draft values on all properties in the city. The process is going to work that once they get to that point, they're going to send out mailers to every owner with an estimate of their new value for 2021. It's important for everybody listening that they shouldn't take that value. We already talked about this. They shouldn't take that value and multiply it by the old tax rate, because we'll have heads exploding all over the city if that happens. Okay. There's going to be a new tax rate that goes along with the increase. So the values are going to increase, the tax rate's going to come down. We don't have any idea what the final tax rate's going to be. The revaluation company, once they send out those mailers, there's going to be an opportunity to call and schedule an informal hearing with them to talk about your numbers. If you think there's some physical data wrong about your property, that would be the time to talk about it with that company. Either they can visit your property to correct the data, or my staff can visit your property if there's a data correction. And they're going to talk about value. They're not going to talk about taxes. They will not talk about taxes because that's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to come up with a market value for your property. So if you have information about sales in your neighborhood that seem to indicate something different than what your estimate of value is, that's what you want to talk about. But don't come in and say, I don't like what my taxes are going to be, because they don't have an answer to that. They only do the part that involves the value. So they'll send out the mailers. They'll have an opportunity to call. Normally they would have in-person hearings. Over the last 15, 16 months, they've had to kind of change over to do a lot of this via telephone call and at times Zoom meetings, I guess. So they're going to have the opportunity to do it that way. But I think we're going to be in a position that we can have in-person meetings as well. We're kind of looking at some space to use for that. In the past, we've used Memorial High School. That's really not available at the time they're going to do this. We've also used some space in front of the welfare department on Elm Street last revaluation. That space is not available. Here in City Hall, Meadow is empty. Manchester Economic Development Office, and there's some space in there. I'm going to check with the city clerk if that's available for the hearings, and if so, we'll be able to have those hearings, in-person hearings, if that's the option people want here at City Hall. And I guess I'll try to make sure Matt Norman knows about that before this video gets out for him to see, so his head doesn't explode. So that should occur late August into maybe early September. And based on the input they get from taxpayers that either call or visit with them, they may make some fine tuning on those properties. They may discover something that they've got incorrect on a neighborhood based on those visits or condominium development, and they'll fine tune that, and then they'll come up with final values. And their deadline to do that with us is September 30th, because we need to report our values to the state in October to get a tax rate. So that's kind of the timing at this point.
All right, Bob. Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to explain this, very complicated and complex issue and concept. Certainly for lay people like me, and I suspect a lot of folks across the city. And certainly it's something that affects us all. As homeowners and renters, will be affected by this too, as multifamily properties are assessed to, and oftentimes rents are affected because of that. So thank you for taking the time to explain it. Again, everyone, Bob Gagne, Chair of the city's Board of Assessors. Bob did share some resources on the Assessors website, on the City of Manchester's website, which I'll be sure and share down in the comments below this video. Thanks again for joining us, Bob.
Thank you, Alderman Stewart. Appreciate the time given me.
Absolutely.